Eli, ¿puedes abrir tu micrófono?
Sí, ¿me escuchan? Hola, hola.
Eli, ¿puedes hablar?
Sí, ¿quieres que siga hablando? ¿Sí me escuchas?
Tienes que... Ya, pero tienes que ponerte en el canal de inglés. ¿Estás en el canal de inglés? Ya. Eli,
Dime.
ya, yo voy a hablar, va a hacer Luisana una prueba.
Ya,
Entonces, pero yo ahorita estoy en el canal de inglés también. Yo lo que no sé es que si tengo que salirme de este canal y ponerme en el normal. Ponte en normal. Ya. Entonces, ahorita estoy en el normal. La Eli debería empezar la traducción de lo que estoy diciendo en este momento, siendo las
okay.
7:04 de la mañana.
It's 7:04 a.m. in the morning.
537 veces te he pedido que nunca
No seas así, oye.
me
No.
mentira.
Cuéntame cómo estás y esa otra vez. Ok. Ok. De una, Luciana. De unas. Se olvidaron de decirles que hablen despacio, por favor. No, mentira.
como una respuesta al llamado urgente de las organizaciones de la sociedad civil ecuatoriana, el movimiento indígena, organizaciones sindicales, que solicitamos urgentemente, justamente,
They request urgently
que del mundo, de la región,
that the world and the region, sister organizations of human rights, can come and see what's happening in this strike and the repression against protestees and the restriction of the right to protest in our country. As an alliance of organizations for human rights, we have identified severe violations of human rights, all the attacks to protestees that have been walking for several hours, many days from all over the country, and were intercepted by military forces and police forces. They have been here since June 24th, have been out in the field, have been interviewing the victims of violations of human rights, and have been interviewing people in the resistance process. And also organizations of the government. And they are here now to tell us what they've seen, what they found in our country, and especially what they recommend to the human rights organization, but especially to the Ecuadorian government and the international community.
Propio presidente de la República, el mismo 24
We want to recall that the president of Ecuador made announcements to the human rights organization. He said this on a national TV showcase. In this sense, in this moment, as Alliance of Organizations for Human Rights, we point out that the Inter-American Human Rights Commission has shown it's willing to come to the country and visit the country and verify what's happening in relation with human rights. We request the Ecuadorian government, the president of Ecuador, to accept the good disposition of the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights, that they want to come to the country and provide all the warranties for them to visit. Here is the Solidarity and Human Rights Mission from Argentina. And we aim that this is not the only mission that comes to the country. And we demand that what we've seen in the country won't happen again. And this is constructing memory and hopefully guarantees of no repetition. And here we are to listen what they have verified, what happened, what's happening in our country in these days. We thank you very much as the Alliance of Organizations for Human Rights. This alliance came together in the strike in October 2019 as a response of the violence in this framework. In this sense, for the alliance, this mission is very important in the sense to contribute to the documentation of what we do and to keep demanding justice, reparation, and reparation. Welcome again to Ecuador, and thank you. This press conference, it's been translated to English, and we'll try to speak slowly for this translation. Good morning, everyone. I will start saying that I can proudly repeat that for me and my partners, nothing unhuman is away from us. Nothing that happens, we don't recognize it. And what we've been able to see these days in Ecuador, we have done a work that has left us tired. Our faces today are not the best ones. We keep receiving requests of people that want to be heard. And we go with a compromise that goes beyond gathering information. That is to do everything that's humanly possible to, that the victims get the reparation that they deserve. We have gotten to that agreement with the families we have interviewed, with the people we have interviewed, people who have been mutilated, who are missing their parent, and maybe situations where the mother or the father can provide for their families. It's a compromise that doesn't end with this trip. And we have gotten to certain points where yesterday we have established a dialogue process. That means the possibility that they can denounce and hopefully obtain their reparation for the damage that they received. We want all the people in Ecuador to know
para nosotros son hombres y mujeres de bien los que
that
viven
for us, you're good people that live from your work, women and men from the rural areas, indigenous communities, urban workers, university students,
abrazar como la
the
alianza
professionals who have been embracing in the Alliance of Organization for Human Rights. To all of them, we tell them that we are totally convinced that you are doing a new Ecuador.
pero están haciendo, si ustedes miran
And
esos
it's
jóvenes
painful
que ayer estaban en
to
la
see
basílica
that youth
acompañando las negociaciones
that were in the Basilica yesterday, in the dialogues with the government and the communities, you will see in those faces that there is a decision of not letting their arms down. And that doesn't mean that the strike won't end, but the aim in Ecuador where the social and human rights are not just words of a campaign, but become concrete facts for the women and men that inhabit this territory. So with this, we start and we take all these words to another part of the Patria Grande, and this commitment, we will take this to where it's necessary. Good morning. We want to thank our colleagues from the Alliance who have received us and who have been with us in this work, to the media that have been helping to spread the truth from the popular sectors. And the report has different chapters and will be uploaded to social media. But maybe I'll just talk about how we've seen the repressive attitude since the national strike started. To start with, mention the testimonies we have gathered are heartbreaking. In all the testimonies, we have seen that the police and military forces have acted with impunity in they were repressing, directing that repression against the population that were peacefully protesting. We've heard testimonies and denounces of terrible abusement, excessive intervention, and unproportional that harmed many victims, citizens, Ecuadorian citizens, and in some cases, lethal attacks. Because this report, we've talked with families of many of the victims that have been murdered in the context of the national strike. And yesterday, in an interview that we request state, we've been informed that there is a sixth person that's been murdered. This repression situation was even deeper in the state of exception. We can also mention that the police forces, the army forces, it's aligned in the same dynamic, such as shooting directly to the face of the protestants in a short distance with the clear goal of murdering, They use cartridges, tear gas, cartridges, and lead bullets against the protest that started from the very first days of the national strike. There's been cruel treatment against the detainees. There are several illegal detentions. We've gathered denounces of cruel treatment and this is a degradation of the human rights against the population. We also manage, we notice that there's been illegal detention cases violating the right of defense. We also received denounces of health services volunteers who have also suffered the repression and persecution by the public forces of the state. I want to mention that as part of this repression, we want to note the persecution to the indigenous condition. There are several denounces of humiliation, persecution against the indigenous nationalities of the indigenous movement. We believe that has also been encouraged by the hate speech and xenophobia promoted from the highest authorities of the state. We want to recall the situation because in many places, this speech of hate against the indigenous movement might move on what were called the mobilizations for the peace. We've received several denuncias in Tumbaco. We've listened and they mentioned that they were civil citizens in coordinations with the force, with the police or military forces who shot against the Protestants. And this is very concerning because, as I've seen in other parts of the continent, this it's necessary to point out the repression is not only in the capital city, it's in many rural areas where the repression situation has been higher. We can mention cases where the police forces have shot tear gas cartridges to the houses. They have shot these cartridges from helicopters. We also receive denounces. We've talked directly with families of the detention of minors, like a case of a 14-year-old boy was detained when he went to buy bread for his mother. And this is a full violation of the rights of these children. We also want to mention about a whole dynamic of persecution and criminalization towards social leaders and indigenous communities. We're very concerned about this of false accusations because in these actions, the right to protest can be violated. The legal process against social leaders of who are in front of this protest, we think it's a main point that has to be shown or denounced to the government. That instead resolving the legitimate social denounces, the government accuses the leaders of the indigenous movement, and finally mention some data of the several testimonies and denounces and provided by the Platform of Human Rights. We can say that from the very beginning of the national strike, there has been over 156 arbitrary detentions, 5 murders, illegal detentions, cruel acts. There are testimonies where the victims have been threatened, so they want to present a formal denounce. We've seen this in many parts of the country. All these violations have been registered during the national strike. Now my colleague Juan will continue with the report. Good morning, everyone. Effectively, we received over 100 testimonies of victims from families, from human rights organizations, social organizations. And we were able to talk, to gather the testimonies of these victims, their families, in Quito, mainly in the Casa de la Cultura, in the Central University, in the area around the Arbolito Park, but also in other places in the San Antonio de Pichincha parish, in Tarqui, from Tarqui parish, in Limoncocha, in the Amazon region, Molleturo, south of the country, in Cuenca, in Loja, south of Ecuador, in the Comuna Santa Clara, in other neighborhoods, in the Metropolitan Hospital, in the community, in the locality of Toglia Grande, in the ancestral community La Toglia, and other places where we met the victims. And I believe all the women, men, and young people we talked to mentioned that they felt that it was useless to denounce, whether for the fear of receiving attacks or retaliations, or because maybe nothing will happen. And this is serious that in a state of right, there aren't trustable mechanisms to denounce these violations. And unfortunately, we're the only international mission that is here.
O de ciertos intereses.
Maybe because of inner issues, despite being mentioned by the president of Ecuador. We haven't seen the Inter-American Commissions of Human Rights to see face-to-face the victims. In all the testimonies, there are several violations of human rights that it's very long to read. The murderers are the first thing where there's a clear direction, who is the target in a situation of conflict, to understand these dynamics. And here it's been said that there are two sides. We've heard this from people in the Fiscalía of Ecuador. In Argentina, we call this the theory of the two democracies. The state will always have a superior responsibility. You can never compare the responsibility of the state with any action from civil society. But if you see this particular conflict, the people, the murderers and the people that are hurt are always from one side. We have the data from 5 people that have been murdered: Felix, Jorge, Eduardo, Ernesto, Jose. Indigenous or mestizos, murdered by the army forces, military forces. That's the most strong violation to human rights, the right to live. We register tens, but we know there might be hundreds. Some mutilations, eyes, arms. With the concerning of this, that these aggressions might have an intention or might be directed to indigenous communities or other communities or minorities. And all this situation, it's worsened with the socioeconomic situation that these families are facing now. These mothers who've seen their kids, their sons mutilated or harmed, they have to, they're concerned about the medicine or expenses they might face. And they know that the government won't repair the victims. Because in addition of suffering this violence, they are re-victimized when they don't find any solution to the situation they're facing. Hundreds of people in all the country in these conditions. And also about the people that are detained, that were illegally detained.
Gente que agarraron en las manifestaciones. Podría haber sido uno, podría haber sido otro, sin identificar una conducta específica de la persona.
These people were detained without identifying a particular attitude of this individual. The detentions were illegal, arbitrary, violent. And with accusations, without evidence, they're being detained.
También hubo situaciones que más que detenciones arbitrarias son privaciones.
We also saw situations that are not just illegal detentions, but might be considered as temporary kidnapping or temporary disappearance, including young people that are taken in the middle of a protest, are taken in vehicles of security forces, are tortured in these vehicles, and many hours after all these tortures, they're thrown in the middle of a road.
Alguna doctrina denomina castigos colectivos.
We also have what's called collective
de lesionar la integridad física de grupos.
When there's intention
No me refiero a situaciones donde hay
to harm the physical integrity.
algún enfrentamiento y se usan
And I'm not talking about situations
armas antidisturbios, sino a ingresar en barrios.
It's in some conflicts they use non-lethal armory.
De la cultura donde claramente se va a afectar a miles y miles.
But there are attacks like the one that happened in the Casa de la Cultura, where thousands of people that were pacifically protesting were attacked. The violation
Varios grupos de mujeres han denunciado todo tipo de tratos degradantes.
Psychological and physical conditions of women.
De los niños
Many groups of women have denounced attacks, the situation
sobre sus madres
of the children,
para sacarle a sus criaturas. Es
and
otro
the
testimonio
threat that their mothers receive,
ataques a las zonas de paz.
and there are other testimonies that we receive, the attacks to the peaceful, and this deserves a special mention. And we have a strong evidence of civilians protected by the police forces that attacked and shot the protests who are from lower social conditions, the wealthier attacking with guns to the lower income population unprotected by the government. Another particular situation is what happened with the right of communication, what happened with the communitary media. Even we receive even our Twitter account was blocked. Several journalists who were beaten, whose equipment was affected. And not because these are communitary communication media, it's less concerning what they faced. This is considered a vulneration of rights by the government. I could continue with this list. We have some emblematic cases. We have 10 emblematic cases, especially of people and communities who have authorized to reveal their identity. They want this to be visible. And we have other 10s that will be in the final report, some that request not to be identified. So why is this information useful in addition to sharing this with other international human rights organizations? Hopefully this will lead the organizations to investigate. We saw the attitude of some prosecutors of willing to investigate. Something that's surprising is, on the other hand, that there were over 80 processes, investigations against social leaders, against protesters. And then we ask how many processes are against the public, the military, the police forces, and probably there might not be one. And the response to this, it's something that we that work in international human rights, the issue is that the people that are harmed, the victims, have to personally go with their own means to the prosecutor's office to start the legal process. When there's evidence here and in any other state of rights, the prosecutor's office has to act and investigate the different crimes perpetrated by the government against the civil society.
Es que nuestro informe debe ser tomado como una noticia del delito, que es la forma que utilizan aquí para hablar de cuando tiene una noticia del delito.
And this report should be considered as evidence, as a report of all these crimes. And this report will include all the audiovisual material we have gathered, which is very heartbreaking. And it tells all the denounces that we have gathered. Now my colleague will do an evaluation of the organizations in this context. I think it's important to note that in this moment,
estamos señalando en lo que sucedió.
We are talking about what happened until these days.
Decirlo porque seguramente van a tratar
It's important to recall
de impugnar como suelen hacer todo lo demás, entonces
that they might appeal to some of these violations. So it's worth to mention this. Good morning, everyone.
Voy a referir brevemente a lo que vimos respecto del rol de las instituciones del Estado. Rol de instituciones del Estado que se puede ver en la falta de total de respuesta de los distintos organismos del
It's
Estado.
very unfortunate to see a lack of response from the institutions of the government. We request to meet the Minister of Defense, the Minister of Government, but we didn't get a response, and other people in the government. What really called our attention, and it's something that we were able to see from all the interviews we had, from all the conversations we had with victims, their families, activists, leaders, is that they see the government as a threat. They see the institutions of the government as a threat. They don't see them. They don't see these institutions as a place where they can talk, where they can share their concerns or denounce. So the institutions of the government don't protect the population. They don't move on with the investigations of the crimes that are committed and the violation of rights. This is not a perception from the victims. In these 4 or 5 days we've been here, we were able to feel that. And in this situation, we received several denounces and hoping that all these crimes solved, and we see that we shouldn't have mentioned
En cuanto al papel en particular del Ministerio Público Fiscal, no solo fue denunciado por su inacción, sino como recién refirió Juan, es uno de los actores, sino el actor principal que implementa y ejecuta la política de criminalización de la protesta social. Ayer, de hecho, nos brindaron, que lo agradecemos, el acto de transparencia del Ministerio Público, la existencia de 189 causas abiertas durante el paro contra militantes, contra activistas o simplemente personas que se manifestaban, o personas que ni siquiera se manifestaban y fueron detenidas arbitrariamente, como todas las demás. Y entendemos que el Ministerio Público Fiscal tiene en los Estados de Derechos otro deber, que es garantizar la protesta social e investigar los crímenes perpetrados por el Estado contra la población civil, y por sobre todo velar por la garantía del derecho a la protesta social, el derecho a la resistencia, lo llaman en Ecuador también, y al derecho a la asociación. También, y esto nos llamó la atención, algunas denuncias respecto del funcionamiento del sistema de salud, en el marco del paro general. Y fueron básicamente tres tipos de hechos que nos han denunciado. Por un lado, la falta de atención a heridos en la represión fue un hecho que, sobre todo en casos de comunidades originarias, nos fue relatado en forma consistente, ya sea por la distancia, o por la imposibilidad, o por la negativa de ser atendidos. Eso es lo que nos han referido. También, en segundo lugar, nos han referido de la adulteración de registros referidos a diagnósticos médicos de las víctimas, de las personas que se van a atender, y esto nos han referido que es con la intención de ocultar la gravedad de los heridos y los cuadros que presentan esas personas que necesitan atención médica, no por parte de los médicos que atienden, sino por parte de los funcionarios que dirigen el sistema de salud. Eso es lo que nos han referido, y hemos podido constatar en la visita la falta de insumos de comida y medicamentos en el sistema de salud, y el trabajo denodado de los profesionales de la salud y de los trabajadores de la salud. Un punto para resaltar es que la adulteración, en caso de no la hemos podido constatar, no tenemos denuncias sobre eso, pero en caso de que eso sea cierto, afecta en forma directa la posibilidad de investigar las violaciones a los derechos humanos, porque es vital saber el tipo de heridas, el tipo de afectación a la salud, para que procedan las denuncias, para que el Ministerio Público Fiscal investigue. Igualmente entendemos que este no es un problema, no es el problema por el cual el Ministerio Público Fiscal no impulsa las investigaciones. A su vez, los profesionales de la salud nos han referido que son víctimas de amenazas respecto de la atención de personas manifestantes. Hemos visto el trabajo de los brigadistas voluntarios que atienden en los sitios de paz a las comunidades y a los manifestantes, y nos han referido que existen amenazas respecto de la conservación de su puesto de trabajo y el futuro profesional en casos de atender víctimas de represión. Y bueno, respecto de la actuación de las fuerzas de seguridad, ya fueron muy elocuentes mis compañeros, el uso injustificado, desproporcionado, y en 6 casos, por lo menos de los que sabemos, letal, de la violencia estatal, que son injustificables, así como la convivencia y la creación de zonas liberadas para que sectores civiles ejecuten actos de violencia contra los manifestantes. Eso es como un primer acercamiento respecto de lo que vimos en cuanto al rol del Estado durante este paro nacional. Muchas gracias.
Bueno, buenos días a todos, a todas. Muchas gracias por estar acompañándonos en esta rueda de prensa. A partir de las distintas intervenciones de mis compañeros y compañeras de la visión, vamos a compartir las conclusiones preliminares en el marco de este informe que estamos presentando, y que van a poder verlos con mayor profundidad y con más datos de lo que aquí se presentan en nuestras páginas y en las páginas de los compañeros de la Alianza de Derechos Humanos. Como les decía, vuelvo a repetir, este informe es de carácter preliminar y a partir de los territorios que nombró mi compañero, concluimos que el Estado ecuatoriano ha cometido delitos de lesa humanidad. El Estado ecuatoriano y acabar con prácticas impropias de un Estado de Derecho. Las autoridades competentes del Estado ecuatoriano deben investigar y juzgar a los responsables de los delitos cometidos. Las autoridades competentes también deben cesar de inmediato con las detenciones arbitrarias, que ahí un poco aclararon nuestras compañeras, y principalmente con la criminalización de la protesta social. Las autoridades competentes del Estado ecuatoriano deben reparar a las víctimas de los delitos cometidos. El Estado debe adoptar medidas urgentes y eficaces para garantizar la no repetición de los delitos cometidos. El Estado ecuatoriano debe ser investigado en las instancias internacionales correspondientes, porque en el marco del paro nacional y a través de sus Fuerzas Armadas y de Seguridad habría asesinado, torturado, lesionado la integridad física, perseguido, amenazado, intimidado y criminalizado a importantes sectores de la población civil. La criminalización y represión desatada impidió, limitó y condicionó la participación política, el derecho de la reunión y el derecho de la protesta. El Estado ecuatoriano debe ser investigado por haber desplegado sobre la población civil indefensa prácticas prohibidas, ejecutando conductas brutales e inhumanas. Y el pueblo ecuatoriano tiene derecho a la apertura de todas las instancias jurisdiccionales, nacionales e internacionales para obtener la reparación integral a través de la verdad y la justicia. Como integrantes de la misión, y por tanto este informe está dirigido a todas las víctimas de la represión, a los pueblos y a las nacionalidades indígenas, a las mujeres, a los y las jóvenes, a los y las estudiantes y a los y las trabajadores que, ejerciendo su derecho legítimo a la resistencia, luchan valientemente en un Ecuador, para que se respeten los derechos económicos, sociales, culturales y los derechos humanos. Muchísimas gracias.
Compañeros, compañeras de Argentina, muchísimas gracias por haber venido, por haber visitado nuestro país,
Country,
recogido los testimonios de las
to
personas,
collect the testimonies of the people that trust in you, that had the trust to talk in front of this untrust that the government projects against civil society, who have been several days in this cold weather of Quito to be heard. This civil population, these indigenous communities and organizations, communities that grow what we eat here, that take care of the water, that take care of nature. They are here to request 10 points to the government. Those 10 requests have to do with improving their lives, to receive fair prices for what they grow, with rights for everyone. Because in all of these points are related to their health, education. And when they were coming, in the whole country, there's been a speech that they are violent, that they are here to destroy Quito. And we could already see acts like an alliance. We could denounce that there were acts of repressions, and this This is very severe. We, as an alliance of human rights organizations for human rights,
Y eso es un
we saw
patrón
the government forces attacking the protest, and this pattern that we could see in many places. The army, the police forces thinks a pacific protest should be done under their conditions, and that violates this fundamental right to protest. And all these vulnerations meant, and all these violations were transformed in a call, in a denounce of help to the international community. And thank you very much for your work. And since these victims might not have hope of reparation and justice and receive all these violations, but thankfully to people like you that do this work, you invest resources in coming to Ecuador, their voices would be heard in other places. And we request you to share this report not only with the Ecuadorian government, but with other international human rights organizations. Thank you very much for being in Ecuador and for gathering these testimonies of what's happening. And we hope with your work, we can construct memory, justice, and no repetition for the victims.
De esta situación más fuerte en el sentido de que la verdadera democracia se construye sobre
and hopefully the truth, democracy can be built upon the respect of the human rights, upon our Constitution of 2008. And that we're very sorry to see how it's been not been respected over and over again. Thank you very much.